Peace and love, you fantastic wonders with spiritual love or being. Nathan here from a spiritual love or being, and yes, you have a spiritual love or being. And today we're going to be obtaining true gnosis. I'm going to be sharing ancient Gnosticism, Christianity, sex rituals, drug use, prayers, rituals, chants, and also the mystery schools. Now, I've been delving into Greek text in order to bring you something special, something unique. So let's begin. Now, the Gnostic text of the prayer of thanksgiving, which mentions a vegetarian diet, as the Gnostics were mostly vegetarian, as in not to cause unnecessary suffering or more suffering, and to not take on impurities or corruption, similar to karma. Now, it also has a prayer to obtain knowledge. So this means that this prayer, this text was read in front of a group, a church, an initiate group, while they would meditate to the reader in order to help guide their consciousness. Now, this is why the Gnostics would go I-E-O and chant. Even the name I-E-O is a secret name of God. But this chanting was done in order to alter a state of mind. Now, the vegetarian diet, this can be found in ancient shamanism of Egypt. Now, their priests, the shamans, would refrain from meat, alcohol, sex. And they would do this for when they went into their trance-like states, they would receive divine insights, visions, of which many would take in psychedelics or even cannabis, as cannabis was associated with the dying and rising of gods, the masculine and feminine nature of God, as cannabis can be both male and female. Now, it was said that the Valentinian Gnostics would also mix in cannabis with their wine in order to relax the body and help the mind receive divine insights to achieve gnosis, spiritual knowledge. Now, the plant itself is associated with Rastafarianism or even Ethiopian Coptic Christianity as the tree of life. So this is most likely passed on through these old Gnostic groups orally. Now, this being said, we also have another Gnostic text called the Excerpt from the Perfect Discourse. Now, this mentions about the mysteries of sex. So this also goes into ancient Egypt, where sex rituals were not uncommon. We also find this in ancient Greece. Now, this also goes into the concept of asso above, asso below. As the gods create in the heavens, the cosmos, we humans here create on earth through sex. Now, the two coming together. This also refers to connecting to one, but also the coming together of two souls becoming one. This is also a reference to the bridal chamber being symbolic. Now, this also goes into the passing off of energy, the exchange of energy through sex. So everything was dualistic, mystic. So to be careful who you had sex with, as you could partake in unnecessary karma or corruption. You could absorb it, basically. So it was best to have intercourse with someone you considered pure, someone who truly loved and who truly loved you, who was awakened, if you will, not asleep or asleep in the light. So they're awake through the darkness. They understand. So the concept of good and evil, they've moved above it. They've now become perfected. So they've been initiated into the mysteries. So again, this is a mystery school concept. This is again achieving gnosis. So one soul would in turn be entwined with another. So they would realize that their souls are coming together throughout their previous lives of reincarnation. Now, this text also refers to those who were ignorant as the blasphemers, as they lack spiritual knowledge, they haven't connected with the spirit within, thus they haven't connected or built a personal relationship with God. Thus they are caught up in a cycle of ignorance. They are separated from self, they are separated from God, separated from nature, they are separated from the mind. So they live in ignorance, in blindness. Now, this means they're given to lust, etc., cause the shitty things out of ignorance in this world. Now, Trismegistus is also mentioned in this text as it's a secret name for Christ. It means the triple-powered one. This is also a reference to the Holy Trinity, the Mother, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Now, when this text mentions, now it's a time to listen, this is a time to listen, this is a time to reflect, to meditate. So these texts were read in gatherings, within a group, within an initiated group. This text also mentions that the true God's will is for mankind to overcome the gods. So to overcome the archons, to overcome the man-made idea of God or the gods, as humans would watch the nature of the rulers of their time and they would consider that to how their gods would act. So this is why Gnostics would associate these people with the archons, so the material rulers of the time. Now, this being said, this was also about ascending, overcoming Yaldabaoth, overcoming the ignorant self, overcoming the ego. Now, the higher self was also associated with your guardian angel, thus this was a secret reference to your ascended Christ. Now the Pharaohs of Shem, this also goes into ejaculation, this meaning the seed being planted into the womb to bring forth life, so the vagina being the portal into this world. Now, this also could be a reference to ancient Egyptian worships of their fertility gods. They believed that the god Atum ejaculated the universe into existence. So this could also be a reference to ancient Gnostic sex cults, or sex cults in Egypt, as they weren't uncommon. Now this text also mentions that the baptism by water is basically the false baptism, as it's being corrupted. So the demon being mentioned here that was baptizing people is the Catholic Church. So it's a secret reference to it. Now this also goes into that the real baptism is the baptism by the Holy Spirit, the baptism by fire. Now this is about achieving gnosis, so being reborn again. Now again, this is why I believe that this ejaculation reference is about the seed, the rebirth, so entering into the world, so escaping the world's incarnation process through knowledge, gnosis, so being liberated through knowledge, spiritual knowledge. Now, in the ancient past, dying and rising gods were also associated with fertility rituals. We even have stories of gods being risen or resurrected through sex. This is especially true in ancient Egypt. I forgot exactly what got it. I haven't got time to go into this because this subject's going to be huge, so let's go move on. Now, so the text Melchizedek. Now, sorry if I butcher names here. This also has chants and prayers. So the mentioning of baptism is also mentioned here. Now, these chants were most likely used during one's baptism, so one's rebirth, so the initiation into Gnosticism, into Gnostic Christianity. So they're now ready for the meat. They've moved on from the milk. They're ready to receive and understand the true mysteries. Now, the prayers and rituals were most likely conducted by priests and bishops of ancient Gnosticism. So in this, we find the end of this text that these revelations must be kept secret. So this meaning that those who read this text shouldn't tell it to outsiders. And it was even mentioned that some should even write an oath that they shouldn't share this text. So meaning that it was secretly guarded within the closely knit mystery schools. So only revealed to the initiates. Now, I also want to mention that throughout a lot of Gnostic text, we have the mentioning of dreams. So these texts are also dream interpretations. So one's understanding of spiritual knowledge within the mind. Now, in the Discourse of the 8th and 9th, which is a very esoteric text found in the Nag Hammadi library, is a Gnostic work. This mentions the ascension of the mind. The mind is a treasure. So this meaning the ascension of the spirit. So this also going into nothing is outside the Father. So everything is within the mind of God. So the mind is a spirit. The mind is a soul. Now, this also goes back into the beliefs of Druids, where they believed the soul was within the head, the mind. Now, this is because Gnosticism is a religion of the mind. It encourages reasoning, thinking, free thinking. It's a philosophy. It's a spiritual philosophy, building a personal relationship with the divine, knowing thyself, searching for the spiritual knowledge within, to connect with the spirit within, to be Christ-like yourself. Now, their rituals and ceremonies also revolved around astrology and science. They were big on mathematics, and they were free thinkers, as they encouraged reasoning, as this would have also been conducted within the mystery schools of ancient Greece. Now, in this book, prayers and chants are also mentioned, and again I mentioned how this would have been done to alter one's state of mind. The use of incense would have also been used, though we've mostly lost them. Now, we don't know exactly what they used. Now, the ancient Jewish rabbis, as incense, they would use frankincense, myrrh, and cannabis, hemp. And they would inhale the fumes in order to receive divine insights. It was said that some Gnostics did the same. Now, it was even said that some would partake on psychedelics, a psychedelic wine, or a cannabis-infused wine. This was also done to help them enter into a trance-like state, as Gnostics were big on meditation, entering into trance-like states. Why? To receive divine insights, spiritual knowledge within, searching within thyself, yourself. Now, it's very likely that this text was used for ceremonial purposes, that this ending of this book may not be used for evil purposes is also mentioned. Now, again, with the mentioning of signing an oath, this is actually this book. I messed up before. So, the mentioning of signing an oath is in this book. So, this meaning that is not to be shared with outsiders. Now, the other one does mention about not sharing, but however, this one here, this mentions about signing an oath. So, this meaning it's only to be received to the initiates. Only the initiates and those who are preaching, teaching, can read this and in turn carry it with them. They can't let it fall into the hands of wrongdoers, those who would use this knowledge for evil or try to use it against them. Now, with the reference of nothing happens outside of the Father, or nothing happens outside of the Father's kingdom, this can be found in the secret book of John. Now, again, this means that nothing is outside the mind of the Father. So you are a mind, a mathematical living mind. So you are a soul. Everything else is clay, it's just flesh, it's material. So this goes into the real world, is the spiritual world, the world within you. Now, the Holy Book of the Great Invisible Spirit, also known as the Gospel of the Egyptians, this starts off with an opening prayer, suggesting that this was read in front of a church, that was read in front of its initiates. Now, it's likely that those who were listening to these texts would have been meditating on the words, seeing where the Spirit leads them, how it enacts with these words that they hear. Now, this would go for words of power. For example, the words of God would have also been contributed to divine protection, to divine insight, to altering one's state of mind, altering one's state of consciousness. It was even said that the word abraxas was even used when one was in pain, such as a toothache, etc. Now, it was no doubt used for divine protection, as was barbello. Now, this text also mentions how the Holy Spiritual Baptism ascends the world. So it goes beyond the world and this false heaven, so the false God. So you're liberated through the uncorruptible God and through Christ, so Christ within you. Now, we also have chants and hymns. Again, this is to alter one's state of consciousness. So these chants and hymns would have also been used on one's baptism, during communion, etc. Now, how I mentioned before, the Valentinians were possibly drinking a cannabis-infused wine, or possibly even a psychedelic wine. Well, the cannabis wine was also used in ancient Egypt as a medicine. It was also used as a means for shamans or priests to receive divine insights, or to help those receive visions while sleeping. So then in turn they would do dream interpretation. So the Gnostics in turn would also do dream interpretations. Many visions were received out of dreams, so in altered states of mind, in trance-like states. Now, what I'm also talking about is an out-of-body experience. So this in turn was to connect with the spirit within, to understand that the body isn't just it's something beyond the body, that this is the soul within it. Now, the Valentinians would also view marriage between their members as enacting of the bridal chamber, of them becoming one. So this is the concept of the masculine and feminine nature of Christ, the masculine and feminine nature of God. So, as so above, so below, as God creates in the heavens, we as humans create here on earth. So again, this goes back into the esoteric schools of ancient Egypt and Greece. Another Gnostic work, the Three Stells of Seth, was one also that starts off with an opening prayer, suggesting that it was read to a church during a mass, during communion. Now, it was likely that this prayer was likely remembered by the priest or bishops as a means to read it to church off by heart. Now, it suggests that because the words are also repeated, this suggests that members of this church would have then in turn repeated the words of the priest or the bishop. Now, divine names are also mentioned here, so this in turn would have served as divine protection to alter one's consciousness, so one would meditate on these words of power, so to see where the mind would take them, where the spirit would lead them. Now, some scholars even suggest the Gnostic text Thunder, a Perfect Mind, was actually used for Gnostic ceremonies. So it's a secret passage, so meaning to return that to Egypt that was stolen by foreigners. So the ones who stole the esoteric knowledge, turning it into their man-made religions. Now, Kiakon, which is Greek, was also a variety of drinks, and some even suggest it was also used as a psychedelic. So many varieties, some psychedelic, some not. Now, This was in particularly favoured by the esoteric mystery schools. So this represented the dying and rising, the rebirth of self. So this was found in the esoteric schools of thought. This was also found in some ancient Gnostic schools of thought. Now, this was in order not just to receive divine insight, but this was symbolic for you resurrecting as a god. So resurrecting into a new life. So leaving your old life behind. So being initiated into the mysteries. Now, this was also associated with purification, to purify oneself, so the rebirth. Now, this rebirth was a state of purification of consciousness, a purification of the soul. So, a shedding of skin. So, it's no longer held by its old materialistic values, and now it's going for spiritual worth. Fungi, which would also be produced on barley, would produce a psychedelic effect. You could also find it on grass, magic mushrooms, for instance, a fungi. Now, this was taken by Gnostic Christians, by Christians in general, especially mystery schools of ancient Sumeria, Egypt and Greece, even in Rome. Now, this being said, some Essene Jewish esoteric groups would also partake in magic mushrooms or DMT. Now, this was also used with cannabis. So cannabis was also used by many different religious groups, such as the Zoroastrians, even the Canaanites and early Jewish rabbis, as we even found incense remains with cannabis burnt remains on an altar in an ancient Jewish temple, which is back in the BC era. And this temple was dedicated to Yahweh and his wife Asherah. Now, this partaking of cannabis was either through the use of inhaling incense, drinking wine, and it was even used in oil to rub on one's skin or to drink, etc. So, depending on the religious culture, it would be taken differently, smoked or taken orally, or even eaten, or even to be drunken. It was said that Buddha ate cannabis for his enjoyment. Now, it's even argued that the women who were growing cannabis in early dawn of humanity were the ones who started the goddess worship religions. Now, religion in turn began from the growing of cannabis to be used as medicine and also burying the dead, which cannabis was also used in burials. Now, this being said, we have a French novelist and playwright of the 1800s named Alexander Dumas. In his work Monte Cristo, he borrows an Egyptian and Persian esoteric story, which he adds into his work. So let's go read this. And this has also got some Greek influence. A dream so sweet, so intoxicating, so voluptuous, that they would sell themselves, body and soul. They believed that the death they would suffer was merely a transition to that life of delights, of which the holy grass had given them a foretaste. Nature wrestles with this divine substance because our nature is not made for the joy, but clings to pain. The dream will rule the dream, will become life, and life become a dream. Try some hashish, my friend, try it. No food in the world will seem to you comparable in fineness, which today you find musty and repellent. So this here is, again, with the dying and rebirth, the use of cannabis, its masculine and feminine nature. Now, again, its use of food being a herb, many different uses from being used as clothing. So it was no doubt to be seen as a holy plant. Now, because it was associated with the masculine and feminine nature, this is one reason why they had the idea of the masculine and feminine nature of God. So God being beyond sex. So in turn, this physical form of sex is the physical incarnate of God, basically. So this is what we see in nature. So again, duality. So the dualistic nature of religion is not new, it's ancient. How I mentioned some Christians would partake in psychedelic wine. Now, there's a chance, especially when you start looking into the Greek text, that Jesus drank a psychedelic wine, this bitter substance. Now, the crown of thorns. What's interesting here, it comes from a thorny branch. Now, thorny in Greek means acacia, which was an acacia tree, which produced DMT. So this meaning the liquid of God. So this also being the forbidden knowledge of God, the blood of God, the semen of God. Now, this can also be associated with the tree of life in ancient Egypt. So this acacia tree was also used in liquid form to produce psychedelic visions in order to receive divine insights. So these psychedelic visions that they were seeing, they would in turn relate that to divine visions, and they would try to interpretate what they would see. Now, the word kiikon, which I mentioned before, which was a psychedelic drink, it could also mean a bittery wine, which is referred to what Jesus drank. But let's get into something deeper. The sponge that was dipped into a substance when Jesus said, "I am thirsty." Now, the sponge is also a fungi. So this in turn is related with mushrooms, psychedelics, the flesh of the gods. Now, this being said, in the mystic cults, the mystery cults, the sea sponge is also associated with the offspring of the sea. It's associated with coming from the underwater temple, from the holiest of holy, the inner chamber, the bridal chamber, the chamber within. So the soul. So this is the jar containing the true essence, the soul. Now, the vinegar wine, this is what is also associated with the brine of the viper, which in the esoteric mystery schools, this means the viper that causes you the thirst. So it's also associated with an antidote, a potion, but it's also associated with medicine and with thepsia oil, which is a Greek word for divine and wondrous one. And it's also a drug. It's wound healing. It can stop bleeding. So this is kind of interesting here. So let's go something further. The hyssop plant, where it's mentioned it's being on a stalk. Well, this makes a substance bitter as well. But the actual plant is purple. Purple is associated with royalty. So Jesus being a king, royalty. So again, symbolic. Now, it also boosts the immune system. It heals infections. So it's also associated with cleanliness, purification. So all this is symbolic. You find drugs in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, right here, Jesus was given a drug. So this is an attempt to heal him. So again, this was within the mystery schools. Again, with the dying and rebirth even. So again, this was partaken of with drugs as well in ancient era for these mystery schools to receive divine insights. So everything is holy. So these plants were considered holy as planted here by God or gods in order for us humans to be able to merge into their realm, to receive insights into it, to access these altered states of consciousness, to have these outer body experiences in order to commune with the angels, with the gods, with God, etc. Before some Christians get angry and say that I mistranslated it because the word oxos is used, which is also called posca, which is a wine mixed with vinegar. However, when we go into this bittery substance, this vinegar relating to the brine of the viper, this being thepsia oil. This oil is also known as honey dripping bread, which means in the spiritual, esoteric knowledge wise, it actually means, sweet spiritual knowledge. So bread being used by Jesus also means knowledge. So I fed them with knowledge. So again, these parables, esoteric meanings, especially when you look into the Greek language, it's vast. It means multiple different things. So whether it was kiikon, oxos, or it was actually meant to be thepsia oil, we'll actually really never know. So there's text from the Bible that haven't been translated into English yet, as the English author didn't know how to speak Greek or Hebrew. He only knew Latin. And so he copied from a Latin text, and all these other Bibles are copied from his version. So this is a problem. So when we go read these Greek stories, we find much more mysteries involved. We find deeper roots of drugs and prostitution. So temple prostitutes, ones who were raised in the temples. So property of God. So if they're women, they're raised there until old enough to be married to someone of noble rank. Or if they were boys, they were raised there until they could become a rabbi themselves or a priest, etc., depending on the form of religion. Temple prostitution, not all were used for sex work. So this use of temple prostitutes is found with many different religions. Now, something interesting, that all this also has to do with the serpent, the viper's brine. This means the serpent has to be lifted up. So again, this is about conquering the ego, the resurrection of self, The rebirth of self, an old form of you dying, shedding of skin to be reborn again. Now, Jesus also had a lot of prostitutes following him, yet holy men of his time rejected them as filth. Why did Jesus associate with these people? It wasn't just because, the Christians say they're sinners. No, because many prostitutes were victims of sex trafficking. So Jesus was out to help these people, not look down on them. Now, sex rituals were also associated with prostitution. Prostitution wasn't just also sex, it was also temple prostitutes. Now, Jesus had a lot of temple prostitutes following him too. This is one reason why he angered the rabbis, as he was taking away their students. They're meant to be property of God, but really they were property of them. For the next generation, they could lead astray. They were also selling lucky charms instead of giving out medicine to the people who needed it. This is why Jesus said, rub this oil on all those who you find are sick. Now, there's 2 recipes, one of which contains 6 pounds of cannabosum, 6 pounds of cannabis, which is still used today. It can treat epilepsy and calluses on the eyes, so treating mild blindness. It boosts the immune system. It's also used to treat cancer, etc. So Jesus knew its medical properties. He was ahead of his time. Now, the Gnostics, they mention in their text with Sophia, the mother, the concept of the feminine nature of God, being a prostitute, being a lover, being the midwife, the virgin. So this meaning God in all humanity, regardless of your origins, regardless if you're a saint or you're a sinner. Now, the Gnostics, they in turn would help people, especially prostitutes as well, as they knew they were victims of what? Human trafficking. Now, it's true, some chose to do prostitution as well, as some people choose to be homeless. But still, the Gnostic person only seen those who were caught up in ignorance as those who were choosing to suffer, or they were blind by the true light within themselves and thus suffer because of this. Now, as again, they were a philosophy, a spiritual philosophy. So they seen the goodness within all man, within all women. They were big on equality. So their teachings were much more aligned with the teachings of Jesus. There's also a scene where Jesus rejects the vinegary substance mixed with myrrh. Myrrh was also burnt alongside frankincense and hemp in order for the rabbis and Canaanite religious priests to receive divine insights from God. The Zoroastrians would burn myrrh alongside frankincense, cannabis, and even opium, and sometimes just cannabis and opium, and they would burn this in order to breathe it in to receive their divine insights. Myrrh was also one of the main ingredients for sex drugs. You couldn't make sex drugs without myrrh, as it would also increase one's performance. Now, it was also used for incense because it also has healing properties. Where I mentioned myrrh being used as a sex drug. Now, some sex drugs were so strong, it could keep someone hard for a week, though they would die shortly after. So those associated with medicines, drugs, were priests, shamans, medical workers. Now, these medical workers were often mystics, priests in their own right, shamans. Now, they would warn those who would take certain drugs to only take so much, as they could be strong. So they were concerned on the potency. Now, they were also associated with purification, wanting to keep pure, and those who would seek them out, wanting to keep them pure. So they in turn might give them a certain drug in order for them to receive a divine insight, though they would be there with them and help them interpret what they're dreaming about, what they're envisioning. So here, with the ancient past, we find these mystery schools were very common. So people would seek out advice to interpret their dreams, to interpret a vision. They might feel like they're running in bad luck or there's a spell against them, so they would seek someone else to get rid of the spell, or maybe seek out a mystic to place a curse on someone, etc. People were very superstitious back then. Now, sex itself was revolved around mysticism, around religion, as was the drugs themselves. So the people of the time were very mystic, very religious. So it's not uncommon to find such uses of drugs throughout many different texts, including religious texts, as I just showed you for example. Now, the Egyptians knew of penicillin, not quite the way that we knew, but they knew that they could produce it from mouldy bread through mould. Now, this knowledge was forgotten. It was the Gnostics that brought it back, especially with the Cathar, who were known for carrying around mouldy bread for this reason, to use as medicine. So the Gnostics were engaging in medicinal arts as they were seekers of knowledge, of medicinal studies, astrology, science, and of course spirituality. So of course we're going to find this again rooted in Gnosticism, the esoteric world, the mystery schools, and indeed religious beliefs itself. So peace and love everyone. I love you all. Connect to one soul. Namaste.